When I finished the book, I put all the chapters in the floor and I start playing with them. And I decided, because I think the story is like a linear, it's from the beginning and then, but sometimes you see I go back 5 years before or 3 years after. I am Armando Lucas Correa. I am a Cuban author. I live in New York, and I'm presenting in Australia my third novel, The Night Travelers. The Night Traveler is the story of the young German poet who has a Michelin girl daughter. Michelin is mixed race with a black German musician. The daughter Lilith, when she's 7 years old, the mother has to do the impossible to get her out of Germany because of the Nuremberg race law. If you are a 7-year girl or boy, you have to be sterilized or go into a concentration camp when you are 7. And then the mother finds a Jewish family and take her out of Germany to Cuba. The MSN St. Louis, that it was an ocean liner with over 900 Jewish refugees that they left Germany in May 13, 1939 from Hamburg to Cuba. All of them, all of the passengers, they have permit of disembark in Havana. Only 28 of the passengers disembarked in Havana because the president, Laredo Bru, at that moment, requested another $500 per passenger. That was a fortune at that moment. And when the boat arrived in Havana, my grandmother was pregnant with my mom, and I remember her when I was, growing up in Cuba during the 70s in Havana, my grandmother fighting with my grandfather, saying Cuba is going to pay very dearly because what they did to the Jewish refugees for the next 100 years. And I remember going with her to the Malecón, the harbor, and saying, oh, here I saw the biggest boat ever arriving in Havana. And when I went to college, I have access to the National Archive doing my thesis, and I asked if they have anything related to the St. Louis. The librarian in Cuba whispering and say, oh, yes, Armando, we used to have 3 boxes labeled with the St. Louis, and all of them disappeared during the 70s. Then when I arrived in Miami in 1991, working for the Herald, the newspaper, as a reporter, I started buying stuff related to some books in language that I don't speak. I have menus, plates, mugs, original picture from the St. Louis. It was a kind of obsession. I am a journalist, and then I was thinking to do a kind of non-fiction book related to the St. Louis in honor to my grandmother. But then in 2005, I became a father. I have my first daughter, Emma, and I always said that she made me a fiction writer. The German Girl. It was my first historical novel based on the St. Louis. And the first line, I remember it was something like, I'm gonna be 12 years old and I decided to kill my parents. And at the beginning it was 9 years old, then 10 years old, then 11, and it was 12 because Emma was 12 when the book went to print. And most of the phrases and I think that kind of sensibility or emotional connection that I create around parents and children is because I became a parent at the end. And it's present in all my books, and in The Daughter Estelle and in The Night Travelers too. I think you can see all this relationship between mothers and children and abandon as the only way to save your children sometimes. Yeah. The Operation Peter Pan, that happened in 1962 after the revolution, the Cuban Revolution, that 14,000 children were sent to US with the help of the Catholic Church in New York. And by themselves, without the parents. And most of the parents, they never saw the children again because there were no relation or traveling or communication until 1978, calculate. And most of the children grew up in Ohio, in the middle of the country, really far away from Havana or Cuba. And then I was covering one of the crises, many crises always in US, working for the magazine. I remember, I don't know if you have information about the US-Mexican border crisis during Donald Trump, and many people crossing the border and many children crossing by themselves, some of them 2 or 3 years old and put it on cages when they arrive. And I covering this story for the magazine. I used to work and going to Miami, and a couple of women, they were telling, oh my God, how can a mother abandon a child? How can a mother can send these children? They have to put it on jail. And this mother, they have to kill this mother. And then I explained to them, do you know about the kinder transport? That 10,000 children were sent from Nazi Germany to England, and all of them are safe right now because the parents were exterminated in Auschwitz. And then I mentioned the Operation Peter Pan. I said, okay, let me create this story because I know that they really have to abandon the child. No? It's part of the novel or the second line of the story. And like the history repeats itself. That was my idea. I said, okay, this is perfect with Operation Peter Pan. The problem was that I need to find, because this is one of my obsessions as a journalist, when I'm covering historical fiction, everything has to be accurate and real. And then Lily, Nadine, I think, is 3 years old. I need to find out if there were 3 years old child in the Operation Peter Pan. And then I started working and doing research, and I found this author that she was a Peter Pan kid. And I said, yes, Armando, I have a couple of pictures here. Even we have one with 2.5. This is perfect. It's the only thing that I need to send Nadine to US by herself. Yeah. That examination or test is one of my favorite scenes. And I remember working on it because it's a couple of pages, but I spent like 6 months. This kind of tests that were real. And I need to find the space. I need to see the building. Where this happened outside Berlin, and to the reader to understand what is this kind of test is because there are 2 reasons to avoid being sterilized. Is one of them is you are really smart, because the theory during the Nuremberg law is that if you are a Michelin, even with the blood or Jewish, you are not smart. And then your brain is damaged, more than your color of the skin. And then that's the reason in the whole first act of the book, Ali and the professor, they are teaching Lily. And, she knows the Pythagoras theory since the beginning, and she's speaking English and knows Shakespeare and reading a lot. And Lily's really smart. And even at night, that's the reason one of the poems from Alice, at night everybody has the same color, is because at night she looks like her mother. It's the same profile, but the hair and the skin color is completely different. It's damaged for the Nazis. And then they went to this space, and one of my majors when I went to college was theater and drama. I started my career as a theater critic. I create like a scene in a theater. You can see the distance between the mother and the child and the doctor and the lights. And it's terrible because I thought, I'm thinking all the time about my children because, I'm Cuban. I am a refugee, and my children, they are Latins, and I'm thinking about them that they are never going to survive a kind of law like that from Hitler. And then you have to put, Ali has to leave her daughter and saw her in the distance, and naked, 7 years old naked, measuring her like the perfection. And then she goes to the test, and she didn't pass the test. And that's for me is one of the terrible things. And she's depressed, and she has to go back to Berlin, and it's light outside. And outside, they can see she's a black girl. And happened one of the horrible things. This is the moment that she decides, okay, I need to abandon you to save you. Yeah. Let's say that I am a storyteller. I am telling a story. I'm trying to go deep in the main characters. Sometimes too deep in some of them. There are, occasional character. And For example, France, I dedicate a lot of time. This is the Nazi, but it's a completely different Nazi that you see in movies or in books. He's gorgeous, he's smart, he writes, he went to college, he is in love with Ali, she's helping Lilith, that she's black, and she's a Nazi. No, he's a Nazi, he has to go to the army, if not going to jail or army. That's the only option for young people. And then you are complicating the story. Like, as I explained, I try to use the Operation Peter Pan. I develop all the eugenic law or pseudo science of the law. And then it's the Cuban Revolution. And then you go to New York, and something terrible happened with the parents that adopted Nadine. And then is the Berlin Wall and the Cold War. And then is the present time, going back to Havana to find out a big secret in the book. When you finish the book, and we're talking about that I am my first editor, I wrote over 300,000 words. Can you imagine? And the book right now is 116,000. I need to cut, but if you cut, some of the story is going to be affected. Then I created a big board that I have to put all the character with the day they were born and and the parents and the story behind the character. Because when you have too many characters, you are in the beginning. I forget the name of the Elizabeth, a character who appears at the end, and I have to create her story. Even it's going to be simple in the book, but in my mind, I have to have all the information and the background to create this character. And this character, in the case of Elizabeth, that is one of my favorite. I didn't want to have her a face or a body type or a skin color or hair. If you think about it, all of the characters, you can see them. Even Martin, Lily's husband, and the Jewish father that go with Lily. But Elizabeth is a character that you don't know if she's evil or she's a good person. And, her father is a Nazi and he survived the war. But at the same time, they save Alice, and they save the Alice writing and the poems, and she trying to make a contact with Nadine and Luna. There is something positive. But if I describe her in a way that you're gonna think is negative, because she's old, she doesn't have her hair perfect, she doesn't have makeup, maybe she's fat or skinny, I don't know. So I want you to create the story when I'm telling the story and when she's speaking by herself. Create her body type. I don't want you to impose in this kind of character that you don't know if she's good or bad. It was crazy. Then I have this kind of ghost in the board, and they have all this detail, even the clothes that Lilith is wearing in Havana, and that maybe I'm mentioning in a simple detail. And when I finish the book, I put all the chapters in the floor and I start playing with them. And I decided, because I think the story is like a linear, it's from the beginning and then, but sometimes you see, I go back 5 years before or 3 years after. The only way I'm going back is to explain the present. It's not like I'm doing two different time. It's simple to explain the present. The first chapter is Ali having Lilith, and then at the end, the woman helping her to have her said, this girl is not German, she's black. And she said, no, her name is Lilith, that is meaning light. And then you go back to see Marcus and the musician, and then you're coming back to the present. The only problem is that in the third act, I'm going back 75 years ago, because you need to learn what happened to Ali, the main character for the Act 1. I always conscious about the pace of the book. Sometimes I remember for the daughter's tale, that is the story of the bookseller owner that during the Hitler and the burning of the book, you remember they burned all, most of the book, they banned all the book, and she have to save only one book. And then she left, and when she's arriving, she see all the books burning around her. They are her babies. And then I wanted to know the smell of the books burning. And they are different than today. You know, they use leather, they use silk, they use a different kind of glue. And I realized, you know, studying a lot of about the making of the book during the 20s and 30s and sometime 19th century, that there is some kind of almond essence in the book when they're burning. And then I wrote 12 pages about the smell. I said, come on, Armando, you know, you only need a sentence about that. And maybe you don't have reaction. But for me, it's important to go deep in this detail. But then, you know, I am my first editor. I am conscious because I study theater and drama. I need the timing and the pace and move on. You know, sometimes I take my time and some kind of a scene that my editors want me to cut. I say, okay, this is important because I am building a character. And some of them I decided to cut it, but some of them I prefer to keep it because it's not only about the pace, we're creating a character and she's strong, she's different. You know, I am lucky that I have, you know, because the book is, for example, The German Girl is in 17 languages in more than 30 countries. With some editors, it's a regular relationship. They send me a couple of questions and that's it. But with Australia and with Anthea and Peter Borland, my editor in New York, it's a back and forth constantly. And I think the reaction always for the writer is, oh, come on. But at the end, you know, the editor, they are right. Because after many years writing by yourself, and the only person who reads my book is my mother, and you need someone with a bigger vision with the book. And I always learn from my editor. And even, you know, with my friends that are writing and they're sending the book to the editor, the first letter is always like a battle, you know, because sometimes they want you to change maybe the end that you spend years trying to have the perfect end, and at the end, you know, they realize that you need something else. But, you know, I always said that you have to breathe, you have to sleep, and the next morning you have a fresh mind. And always, I think the editors are right. I have been a journalist that I started my career as a theater critic. And then when I started working for the Herald, of course, I work with the hard news, you know, elections, crime. But at the same time, and I enjoy a lot when you do a kind of profile that you have to have emotional connection with the audience. And that helps when you are going to be a fiction writer, I think. And then I moved to New York. I have to work in the entertainment magazine, sometimes doing profiles, sometimes doing interview, but it's a kind of stories that you have to create a profile and go deep with the character, you know, and that helped. In the same of a journalist is that I love doing research. I talk to my writers, you know, fellow writers, and they hate when they have to do research because it's like doing the homework. But for me, the homework, when you are going deep in the research, when you write, is fluid, you know, it's easy. And I can start writing like you know, we are all obsessed with the perfect sentence, with the perfect word, with the perfect paragraph. But everybody can do that, you know. We're creating a scene and a character and create the emotional connection. That's the unique part of you. Because you can have the technique, you know, you can learn, you can go to college and you are gonna know what is gonna be the law for your language, and and do it the perfect paragraph, but that not make you a writer. I think, when you start creating the story and developing the story and mixing, and I think this is the moment that you realize that you are a real writer. No, I remember that we created a couple of questions for the book club in New York, but thinking right now, there is something that is always present in my book, that is history repeats itself. And this is not my phrase. I remember touring with one of the survivors of the St. Louis, Anna Maria Gordon in Canada. She was promoting the book, and she did it in the middle of a TV show. She said, and the thing that I like of Armando's book is that in all of them, you can see that history repeats itself, and we never learn from history. And I think this is one point to start. And the other thing is, in this book, particularly in The Night Traveler, I developed the idea, and I was very conscious when I was doing, the dichotomy of the good and bad. And following the Hannah Arendt German philosopher, about the banality of evil, you can see them. So France is bad or good. So what kind of person is France or Elizabeth, or even Lilith or Ali, that abandoned their children, or even Martin, that he's a kind of ghost and depressed with the Cuban Revolution, or even the Jewish parent that they killed themselves, or what happened with Nadine's adopted parents. This dichotomy, I think, is important to discuss, because nothing is black and white. What next? It's a couple of things, okay. Next year, because I finished already, I'm in the middle of the editing process, it's a book that I hope you're going to have it here in Australia. It's called The Silence in Her Eyes. And it's for the first time that I'm writing a book in the present time. It's going to be today, New York, an apartment, and let's see what happens with the book. But I am writing right now a very ambitious novel, let's say that way. It's going to be my Cuban novel, and it's going to be inspired in my grandmother, and it's the history of the 20th century in Cuba. She's the daughter of the Spanish immigrant. They arrived in Guantanamo, in this case. At the end of the 19th century, my grandmother was born the first day of the 20th century, and she died at the end of the century. And then it's going to start in Guantanamo. Actually, it's going to start in Spain, then Guantanamo. They moved to Havana during the war. They went to New York. After the Cuban Revolution, they moved back to Havana. And then she's going to see the whole country destroyed around her, and losing and the family, and the battling and different ideas. And the big generation from New York arriving in Havana during the 60s, with all these famous writers, Sartre, arriving in Havana, and because she speaks English, and is a literary center during the 60s, and then starting the censorship, and all these writers getting in jail. It's going to be, I am in the middle of the story, and I hope I'm going to finish by the beginning of the next year. And it's called What We Once Were. Thank you. I am always said that I'm happy to be in Australia, because with the German girl, this was the first country who made her a bestseller, the first country in English, and then Canada, and after that, US. The same in Spanish, Colombia was the first one to make the German girl a bestseller. I think, thank you very much.